Before I get in all this, I want to thank the Georgia Peanut Commission, the National Peanut Board, and the Southern Peanut Farmers Federation for supporting my program, which is a key economic piece that's been going on since in the late 1990s to provide the relevant information for you as a farmers and also for your leadership to help in the process when they're dealing with Washington, D.C. or elsewhere. Starting off this year, most of you farmers remember seeing, all these other commodities, soybeans, where it reached that high of $16 before planting time. You had, let me go back, corn got up over $8. Back in the early 2000s when we had, with our rep farms, looking at the prices, it was easy to say whatever corn price was, you just multiply it by 100, and that's what you should get for peanuts, and which would have meant you should have gotten over $800 this year, but I don't think anybody got that. And then cotton ran up, and I think that was a lot more bidding for acres, knowing how the weather was out in the Southwest, that they may not have much acreage, so they need to get it out of the Southeast, and with peanuts in Mississippi, in some of those areas you got corn and soybeans, they had to bid that away from them to get it. And so you saw the run up, and once planting got done, you're through, you're ready to start grading your crop. What happened on every one of these crops? It just tanked on the prices. Wheat's similar, but all the wheat issue was due to the Black Sea, the Ukraine issues, about why it went up. And I talked to my family stuff back to Oklahoma. I said, well, if it got that high, you had a wheat harvest, I think I would retire and enjoy that high price, because I remember many years wheat never was much more than about $2 to $3 a bushel growing up out there. So the question is, why are peanut prices flat? This year's price was even maybe a little bit less than what you got last year. And that, when you look at the costs and stuff, you go, something's not right in this process. What's going on? So I know Professor said you can beat the data many ways, and I know a lot of organizations try to do that to paint the best picture. I don't seem to have that reputation, Ken. And that I try to look at, let's look at it and cut down through the, get rid of the chaff and see what's going on. And that's a little bit what I'm going to do right now. And that's basically, when you look at the peanut planted acres, and I started in 2003. As Bob mentioned, we had a revolutionary change in the program in 2002. So you look at from 2003 to 2021, we had basically, and I just did a linear trend, that takes away the highs and the lows, the peaks and valleys. And you basically see we've been increasing about not quite 16,000 acres a year on average. Now you can see we do a lot of, jumping around. And like this is 21, 22 is forecast to be a little bit down from last year. But the overall trend is close to 16,000 acres that you have been increasing over time. The yield is basically during that same time period has been increasing about 64 to 65 pounds per acre per year average. Now, you got your peaks and valleys again, but while that's a lot, it's due to weather. Drought like this year, they're predicting the yields might be down because look at the weather. These are national on harvested acres. This is all USDA data. None of this data I'm giving you is where it came out of my shop, where I sat down at my computer and said, I think I need to modify it this way or modify it that way. This is what USDA says that people out there and other organizations will look at when they want to deal with, as Bob says, with some of them going after the peanut program and what's going on, they use USDA data. So with that productivity from the yield and from acres, our production has been increasing over 70,000 tons a year. The trend line, 70,000 tons a year, we've been having an increase in production. Now you can tell since 2015 it has not maintained as much, but looking at the trend line, you're talking about 70,000 tons. Food use, before I get into those numbers there, food use, this industry had two key components that helped get the demand for food use for peanuts back on track. There was the Peanut Institute that was formed in 1996. The National Peanut Board was around, I think, 1998, 99, but the money didn't become available until about 2000, if I'm correct, it's somewhere in that period. Those two are the two key things that helped get our consumption of food back on track. But even with that, it's still only increasing trend line about 25,000 tons of use. Again, USDA data. And basically, when you look at a percentage per year, it's growing about what the population rate is growing in the United States. So, if you take that production minus that food use, and that's the rest of it, you have to figure out how it's going to be used. That's around 45,000 tons. After you subtract food use, it's about 45,000 tons per year trend line increase. Exports, they've been growing good, 31,000 tons a year. Though the last since 2015 has been more flat, as Bob alluded to about Europe with aflatoxin problems. On a personal scale, who's been dealing with trade since 1978, and I was involved with the GATT negotiations on peanuts, with the numbers, et cetera, that the European aflatoxin criterias that you see today is no different what it was in 1994, 1995, when GATT was ratified. So there's something else going on in this whole thing as to why has that become a critical issue. Part of my answer would be is politics. I was taught back in 69, 70 in my school classes that politics enters into trade for U.S. products, and I think that enters in today. And I think there's a lot of repercussions with Europe about, while we might like what the Trump administration did, it also irritated a lot of the world folks, and I think that impacted how they will use the rules to impact it. So you got the exports around 30,000 ton increase. So what's the net? After you take food and exports out, we still got over 14,000 tons per year increase out there to try to come up with to get rid of. That's an increase over what you got for food and exports. That is why they always talk about, well, the prices are down, we're not going to increase because the amount of carryover we have is plenty out there. We don't need any more, so we're not going to increase the prices because you farmers are still going to grow it no matter what. Now this past year with that soybean prices, I told some, I didn't work out the numbers, I'm not sure I would not have put soybeans in rather than peanuts, but they said, but that'll mess up my rotation. I said, well, instead of this year supposed to be peanuts, you put soybeans, you go 2 more years or 3 years with your other crops, then you come back with peanuts, the prices are right. But the problem we have in the South and the Southeast is we don't have the infrastructure to handle that big increase. Georgia, when I first came about 1980, we had over 1.1 million acres of soybeans in the state of Georgia. But that infrastructure is not there anymore. So infrastructure is what keeps us from maybe switching some. But we got an issue here about this whole, where we keep increasing. The current demands and how everybody's doing stuff and their modeling and how they're doing their programs is not going to be good enough if you want to see increases in prices like you have other commodities. Part of the reason why you see soybeans, and I'll allude to this a little bit later again, if I don't forget from this old age, that I've listened to some of the webinars that were on that you could hook up to without having to travel to states to see, where the Federal Reserve banks had one dealing with biofuels and RFS, Renewable Fuel Standards. They were showing that with California and some of the others pushing about shifting from gasoline to renewable biofuels, and they're building plants in California that by 2030, the feedstock, which is basically soybeans, is what they got in the models, to feed these plants, there will be no soybeans exported out of this country because it's going to be needed to fuel all those plants. Now, my question comes to my mind is, think back on corn, where some of you were at the American USA Peanut Congress a few years ago, where Mike Swanson, one of the chief economists for Wells Fargo Bank, was talking about with the productivity in corn, which is what you're seeing, and the productivity in soybeans, which is being seen, similar to what's going on with peanuts, is they were concerned that they need to find other demand. They came up with the renewable fuel standards, and it got it changed, what, in 2007, Bob, when that made it more lucrative, where they mandated you had to have 10%. What's going on now with corn? Are they worried about corn that's going in for the feedstock or food use? They're looking at that renewable fuel, try to get it up to 15%, 20%, 25%, because they know when that goes up, it's mandated. It doesn't matter what the cost is. Those plants are going to have to get that product put into it to meet those federal requirements. My question is, which I've hit some of the leadership and I've hit Bob a little bit, why can't we, peanuts, since it was the original biodiesel fuel, why can't we get in there and mandate a certain percentage of all that feedstock that's going to go on these plants down the road be used, has to have peanuts in there. So, because back several years ago when they were trying to look at can we compete in the biodiesel, Marshall Lamb, the Peanut Lab, they did a lot of good studies showing that right now with the prices for food use, we cannot compete. But when it's mandated, it doesn't matter what that cost is. So you need to think about that as you're going through this process. Come on. So, that's to me is one part that's dealing with this farm bill, and understand why you're not seeing any increase in prices. As long as that carryover is up there in a way it keeps growing, you've got to do something about it. Because basically the regular food use that we have in terms of peanut butter, snack peanuts, peanut candy, clean end shell, and other uses, which is your peanut flour and that kind of stuff, it's basically been flat, except for the end shell's been dropping. The other uses has not been much of anything. We've got to come up with some totally out of the pocket ideas. Now I'm going to shift from that part to the critical part where Bob mentioned about folks are bubbling up about having increased reference price because we need it. These rep farms, I'm going to be talking about my rep farms now. That's been going on. Last year was the 20th anniversary of these rep farms. And I want to thank several farmers out here are part of the group that I collect, where I've got 22 of them going, as you can see, from Virginia all the way through to New Mexico, and it's about proportioned out to production shares, acreages and production shares. Last year I did the update. Many of the farmers who were, I'm not going to have them show up their hands, but they have to endure me. This last time was between 3 to 5 hours to make sure I get the cost right for your production. And I would not get off until I knew you gave it to me and not just something off the top of the head. So when we walked out of there, we had accurate cost, that cost to produce a ton of peanuts, but also collected for cotton, corn, soybeans, any of that part that's a major part in that operation. So, when you deal with DC and some of these other land-grant universities that are Bob's good buddies from Illinois and some of the other Corn Belt Midwest ones, they've been putting out reports that basically attack Southern ag. All their data is they're using USDA official data, which is ERS, in terms of cost of production. ERS for the 21, and they came out in May of the 2022 cost. They came out, and it's based off of their survey back in 2013, and then they use indexes of prices paid nationally to inflate their cost. Okay? So, let's take 2021. That was last year's, where the farmers told me this is what it is, where I pulled it together. It basically, I'm just going to look at the total operating costs for you. It was $810 per acre on our rep farms. USDA says, well, that's only $479. That's a 69% difference in what they report. You come to the total, what if I hit it too fast? There. You get the total cost. Our rep farms had $1,300. Ours is total cash flow. How much you're having to pay that year to produce a crop, and that included your other costs like taxes, insurance, fleet liability, your apps, repairs and maintenance, everything. USDA says that's only $932 an acre. That's a 39% difference. USDA has in their overhead, general farm overhead, which is kind of supposed to be the manager's part. I don't include any of that on my side. This is what you actually have to pay out to produce the crop. So let's go to 2022. December, I came up talking to folks. I came up with what I thought might be. It's the first time I really came up with what I thought the various inflation costs would be for every item that farmers are going to be having to face. I plugged the numbers in. But recently, FAPRI, which is a major think tank that Washington, D.C. respects and take their numbers, and Ag Food Policy Center testified up there where they collected from some of their farmers what the inputs were. I took those two sets of numbers, whatever Ag Food Policy from their rep farms, cost increase, if that didn't have it reported, I took FAPRI's numbers, and that meant then, for me, it went up to $1,093 for 2022. USDA did their forecast using prices paid from 21 on to 22. It's only $566 a ton. That's almost 100% difference in what your operating cost is, what USDA. And this is the number that these other institutions who are trying to attack the peanut program or give Bob grief are using those numbers because they said, well, that's USDA, it's official, it's accurate. So when you get to the total cost, which I don't have, the overhead types, some of that stuff, because that's not a cost, that's just an accounting thing. We're still over 50% higher. Okay? This is what you're dealing with. To show them what makes it worse, where these guys will take the numbers and they'll say, okay, let's take on the 22 at $500, you only need less than 2,300 pounds to break even with on your operating cost. Our rep farm shows you need at least 4,375. You're talking about over a ton difference in production compared to what USDA is saying and what you farmers tell me on the operating cost. You go to the total cost at 500. You need about what USDA says your average yield is. I go, you need about 6,400 pounds to break even this year for your total cost. These are the numbers, and this is what Bob is having to deal with up there in D.C. and some of these congressmen. So, the message from this part is, you as individual farmers, Bob mentioned about where you need to talk to your local congressman and other folks out there. You need to be telling them, this is what our cost is, and you can use these numbers. USDA is totally off base. They don't have folks that know how, get the data and then just use an index as prices paid. It's different in the South than it is nationally. You need to be communicating not to your grower leadership, but beyond. You need to be communicating. So Bob mentioned about the dairy program. He said to me, hey, Stan, they're thinking about having a peanut margin insurance program. I said, oh, crap. And so I put up a little chart about how dairy's doing it. And so the question is, again, how are you going to deal with new producers? They've got USDA has a national monthly price they collect off of what the milk prices are. What are they going to use for peanuts? They're going to use what NASS reports, which is based on what the shellers report, which is based on a contract that was done 9 months ago. We had the same issue with the revenue insurance. Or they're going to do what they do in the revenue insurance, which is the kitchen sink approach, where you got all the other, like soybean meal, wheat prices, other stuff going in there, and come up with an equation saying that's what the peanut price is. How are they going to pay? You know, it's bi-monthly on dairy. Is it just going to be once a year for peanuts? To me, the input cost. What peanut inputs are going to be used to determine the peanut cost of production? For dairy, they use the national corn price, soybean meal price, and alfalfa hay prices. And they got this little index thing, how they do it. You going to use the USDA ERS numbers? Do you guys think you might want to use those? And they got where the coverage level is based on per hundredweight. Like you want to have guaranteed $4 a hundredweight, or you want $9.50, and it's an insurance program. Who's going to make the decision tools? Is it just going to be USDA and RMA, or are you going to have where these universities are up there in the Midwest do the calculations for you? Those are issues that you got to be aware of for the leadership of trying to change it, which will be a revolutionary type thing, not an evolutionary program. Finally, when you look at these programs, and you can throw many numbers out, and they'll talk about, Bob mentioned about, it was almost $6 billion, and they come down around the $3 to $4 billion. I took and looked at what is the cost per person in this United States to have the program to ensure that you have a good, stable food supply, and it's nutritious for peanuts, it's healthy for you. So I took CBO, which they're the god up there in DC, right, Bob? They're the god. When they come up with the numbers, can't argue, can't change it. And so you take that, their numbers is what I took, what they showed to be the cost of corn, cotton, peanuts, rice, soybeans, and wheat. What the cost of that program is divided by the U.S. population. So what is it costing per person? Now I got to give a caveat on corn and soybeans. I do not have the renewable fuel standards subsidies that they give those guys up there to the plants that help them out. This is just strictly Title I cost. Peanuts is $1.17 per person. Corn was $3.25. Cotton was $2.48. You can see the numbers. On a per person to deliver a nutritious source of food, I think you would all agree you do get a good bang. They get a good bang for the buck. No, don't stop. Let me finish so I can stay within my time. Then I'll yield back any time to the chairman, and then they can decide what they want to do. My take from all this, you need to think outside the box, create new demand. I mentioned that earlier about that renewable biofuels, because basically productivity exceeds the traditional demand growth. And as you heard earlier when they were talking about this morning, about some new genetic information, stuff that you can improve your yields. With that, what they've done with that area with the genes and stuff, that productivity is probably going to just say double. But how are you going to handle all this? I mean, basically, can we compete in the bulk market driven by price? You've heard me before on that. Because when our competitors are developing countries or our competitors, my answer, you cannot compete on price for what it does and how we have all the rules and regulations. As I said earlier, you as individuals need to be engaged in this farm bill process. In the past, you have not really been. Usually said, our leadership, Bob, the king, will take care of it. But Bob's had one more farm bill than I've had up there in DC. And I keep thinking, it can't get worse. He alluded to this time, it's probably gonna be tough, much worse. I'm not giving out any predictions on there. But you've gotta be, so it means it's gonna take more people in the family to deal with this stuff. And basically, because the bottom line is the peanut program and the Farm Bill has provided a good safety net. But there's no guarantee to continue. 2014, rice and peanuts is the only one that really had a good safety net in the program compared to the other commodities. And they're trying to take it out of us because our folks did such an excellent job to give a safety net. So that's where I'm at. Have a great rest of the day. And you got my phone number, email. Some of you already know how to contact me. On my last word for you, I've been asked several times, what's going to be the PLC come October this year so we can help pay for some of this debt? Unfortunately, as of today, it's only $50 based on what NASA reporting. NASA will change those numbers after July 31st maybe. So I'm saying $50 plus or minus $2 should capture the range of what you should be expecting to see this year come October. Thank you again. I appreciate it.